This is one pre-med, and this is 30,000 pre-meds. And every year, over 30,000 pre-meds don't get into a single medical school. And if you want to get into top programs like UCLA, their acceptance rate is 2.2%. One of the most common mistakes that pre-meds make is not having a 4-year plan. And I totally get it. Researching medical school prerequisites and figuring out what classes to take when can take hours. And you're busy enough. The good thing is that creating a perfect 4-year plan is simple, and it becomes the exact blueprint that you follow on your way to becoming a doctor. Unfortunately, I can't fill this out for you. Well, that's not totally true. I can. There you go. This is the perfect 4-year plan, no matter your situation, even if you're a 0 gap year student, a 1 gap year student, or a 2 gap year student. You can use this immediately, and if you need to customize it, it'll take you minutes as opposed to the hours it takes to do all this research. Creating this plug and play template took me 20 hours, and I hope it helps you create your perfect 4-year plan. In this video, I'll walk you through how this template works, how to customize it for your own dream medical school timeline, and how to fit the MCAT, extracurriculars, and letters of recommendations in so when you want to apply to medical school, you'll be far ahead of the game. Let's make sure you're not one of those 30,000 pre-meds that don't earn a single acceptance every year. All right, let's start with my very own actual 4-year plan. This is the one that I used from 2015 to 2019 when I myself was an undergrad at UCLA. And I want to point your attention to a variety of different places here. For one, look at the different number of sheets that I have on this. Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3, Sheet 4, the schedule as of spring 2018, and kind of a fun one where I'm just playing around with my different schedules. You can see that the most important part of a 4-year plan, like with many things in your pre-med journey, is to really just get started, right? Over time, you'll start to get closer and closer and closer to the eventual perfect plan that you'll rock with. But when you start, the most important thing is just to be directionally correct, to be moving in generally in the right vicinity. And so you'll see in the beginning here, I don't even have a 4th year. Right? I put fun here. I put Spanish 3, 4, 5, which I didn't end up taking because I ended up taking that in summer school. And so you'll see that this first rendition of my personal statement is not accurate, right? It has HC65W, a class that I could never get into. And it has a lot of things that are open, right? But it does have a lot of important things, from when I wanted to do my research, SRP 99, to when I was going to take the MCAT, to when I was going to start personal statements, and when I was going to apply to medical school. Over time, you see I get a little bit more sophisticated. I add a minor here, and that lets me stick upper division BMR. That lets me figure out when I'm going to do my research. Then I have another rendition here where I'm talking about adding these GEs into my 4-year plan and figuring out what I need, and I'm still missing with this course load. And then over time, I get even more sophisticated. I'm asking questions, or I'm writing down questions that I eventually ask for my upper division counselor. And then I highlight things that fulfill certain criteria, whether it's GE criteria or writing criteria, or the amount of units that I need for junior standing. I am starting to get more sophisticated over time. The honors classes that I have, the upper division courses that I need, and then the foundations that I need just to graduate, right? And then finally, I get to this, which ends up being pretty accurate and representative of my overall pre-med journey. These courses show me when I'm doing what GE courses. In red, you'll see all my writing courses. I need a year of writing for medical school. You'll see when I'm taking my research credits, when I took my Spanish 3 class at my community college, when I took the MCAT, and when I submitted my primary and secondary applications. This is also making sure that I'm fulfilling all my credits just to graduate my major with the overall college and the upper division requirements, and then also graduate with honors, completing those courses there, and also fulfilling my minor requirements here. So you'll notice that I was able to graduate with a major, a minor, and honors in less than 4 years. I didn't actually have a spring quarter. I graduated an entire quarter early. And that's kind of the transition that I want to get to here, is that you'll notice that for most majors, you really only need 3 years to fulfill all the credits, right? All my upper division courses here, I have a total of about 62 units for a class or for a unit where we approximate or assume that we take about 17, 18 units. You can complete this in 3 or 4 quarters, which means that if you get a head start on your upper division coursework, then you could very well just graduate in 3 years. I decided I wanted a 4-year college experience, but I still wanted to graduate early. I still wanted to apply with no gap year. I still wanted to add a minor, and I still wanted to graduate with honors, and you can do that with the appropriate 4-year plan. Nowadays, you don't have to start from scratch because many colleges have been very, very advanced or have developed their advising so that they have all the requirements outlined for you. This is a document from UCLA that wasn't available back when I was in undergrad, but now outlines very clearly what you need to eventually apply to health professional schools like medical schools. So you'll see that you'll need a year of biology, and this is specific to UCLA. So really you just need 7A, 7B, 7C. You can take this actual 23 lab and this 107 course, which is completely optional. You can take that at a later date, but for sure these 3 courses are 12 units. Same with here, 14A, 14B, 14C, 14D. Again, you can take these labs later on. Chem 153A or biochem, and then a year of mathematics. You can do what I did, which is just LS 30A and 30B, and then just take a stats class that satisfies your year of mathematics, or you can finish the algebra series with 3A or 31A. Some additional options that I consider just to supplement my math classes, especially if you have AP credit that tests you out of LS 30A or tests you out of Math 3A. If you need that additional class, these are the comp sci classes or the statistics or biostatistics classes are options for you to get that additional last class. Same with the physics here. All these are pretty well outlined, and you can see it's relatively straightforward, right? We need 1, 2, 3 bio classes, 1, 2 gen chem classes, 1, 2 OChem classes, 153A, 1 biochem class, and then 1, 2, 3 math classes, 1, 2, 3 physics classes, and then 1, 2, 3 W or writing classes. The next thing that they'll also suggest is Psych 10 and Sociology 1. Notable here that it's only recommended for MCAT prep, so it's actually not common to most majors to graduate. If you didn't take this, that would be okay, both for the MCAT and for your graduation requirements. So I actually recommend being efficient. This actually doesn't overlap very well with the MCAT, so I typically recommend against taking Psych and Soc unless you're highly interested in it. And even better now, a lot of departments have their own specific major pages with 3 and 4 year options. I'll take a look at neuroscience here just to show you again how developed these 4-year plans have gotten over time. So you can see exactly in a 4-year plan with essentially no summers taken, right? Every summer is off in this 4-year plan. You can complete this pretty comfortably. 13 units, 13 units, 13 units, 13 units. For most viewers here, 12 or 13 units is probably on the lower end for you. A lot of UCLA students end up taking 16, 18, 20, 21 units, especially when they're considering the SRP 99 and electives and the research credit that they get for those coursework. Eventually, it ends up being 185 total units, and you can complete this pretty comfortably 3 or 4 classes a year. Now, if you look at the 3-year plan, it's really not too much more aggressive, right? We have a consistent 18 to 16 units per quarter. We use a couple of summers here to get ahead of the game, and comfortably now we graduate in the 3rd year of our spring. Again, this just demonstrates that a 4-year plan or a 3-year plan at that will help you move further and further along your pre-med journey so that you don't have to worry about what classes you're taking where. You can plug and play, and if you're at a public school like I was and couldn't get the classes that you needed, you can swap them in and out easily. So Use the resources available at your institution, but if you don't have any of those institutional resources, just make sure you have a general sense of how these are being built. And we'll talk about that now, essentially how to build your dream medical school timeline. This is our template here. This will always be free, available in the link in the description box below. And it helps you really streamline everything that you need to consider when applying or creating a 4-year timeline that makes sense for your journey. Courses will fall in the fall, winter, or spring of different years. Pretty self-explanatory here. And then the med school timeline. These are things that are relevant to not coursework, but essentially your pre-med journey overall. This is also a place where you can add your extracurriculars to see how they're growing over time. You can classify them based on kind of how they'll be assessed on your MCAT application, whether they're volunteering or non-clinical volunteering or hobbies. Any questions you'll have for your departmental counselors, you can stick them here. And then all your major requirements you can stick here, just so that you can see very clearly how you're satisfying every single thing over time. Every year, over 50,000 pre-meds apply to medical school, and over 60% don't get into a single one. If this video hasn't been completely trashed thus far, I highly encourage you to take a look at the free resources we have in our description box below. Click the link in the description box to find out more, and for now, let's go back to the video. Essentially though, what I want to make sure that we do is we just build one together, right? So we have seen the requirements on the UCLA pre-health page, and regardless of what school that you go to, those requirements will stand pretty much through every college that you go to. They're pretty much national pre-med requirements. And so why don't we just write them down, right? We have Bio 1, Bio 2, Bio 3, and then we have Chem 1, Chem 2, essentially Gen Chem, I should say. So let's just add that. Then we have OChem 1, OChem 2. So I'm making my schedule with you as if you were starting from scratch here. We have Biochem 1, and then we have Physics 1, Physics 2, Physics 3. Let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see. I'll just stick that here for now, just so we can all see it together. And then we'll throw in Math 1, Math 2, and then Math 3 as well. And for the sake of the argument, I'll just leave Psych and Soc out of it so that you guys can plan it together pretty easily on your own. Okay, so with this 4-year plan template, how are we going to utilize it? So let's say we have a brand new freshman and we're starting from scratch. Typically the first series of courses that you'll go through are biology courses. And so you'll see that these courses kind of pretty much just fall in like clockwork, right? We have Bio 1, 2, and 3. That'll fall in for our freshman, winter, and sophomore. Freshman, fall, winter, and spring quarters. And again, if you have a semester system plan, this can also be easily adapted. And then Gen Chem we can also throw in here as well, Gen Chem 1 and 2, and people will often take OChem 1 immediately after, or OChem 2 here. Biochem I like to take in the spring for reasons I'll explain in a bit, and then Physics 1, 2, and 3 can be kind of your sophomore course load. Math, again, is really just a requirement not only to graduate, but also just to matriculate to medical school. It's not really too relevant in the realm of the MCAT, so I'm going to actually put these a little bit lower down here. We can get to them later. But you can see really your required coursework, these are just 2 science classes a quarter, if that. There's 1 quarter where you don't have a science class, and then otherwise you can fit in your GEs, you can fit in your labs, you can fit in your classes of interest, right? But overall, and then you can even start fitting in your writing classes or your Spanish or language classes. Take a look at what other classes that you'd like to experience before the end of your college career, because truthfully, there's not a lot of coursework that is required prior to applying to medical school. But still, we want to make those courses the center of our attention and start there. Okay, so this is a pretty compact timeline, And some people will fear kind of taking, especially if they take the math courses in their freshman year, and math is kind of a difficult subject for them. This will be pretty difficult, right? Bio, Gen Chem, math, and then just like really getting used to college. That'll be a big workload. And so in a future rendition of this plan, I'll duplicate it and show you what it looks like on a 1 gap year timeline and then on a 2 gap year timeline. So let's see now on this gap year, 0 gap year timeline. It's kind of the identical timeline that I took to go straight into medical school. Why do we do it like this? Well, I always believe in working backwards from our goal, right? If our goal is to get into medical school with 0 gap years, then when does that happen, right? So let's say we add another column here, and just so everyone can see it, this is freshman year, this is sophomore year, this is junior year, and then this is senior year, right? If you were on a classic 4-year undergrad timeline, you would graduate college spring of your senior year. So we'll put that here. And if you wanted to start a 0 gap year timeline, where you started medical school essentially immediately after, so let's say you graduate in June of 2026, a 0 gap year timeline would mean that you start medical school in August of 2026. So you get essentially that summer or those 2 or 3 months off. So if we want to start medical school in August of 2026, let's work backwards, right? We take this guy. What is the step immediately before starting medical school? Well, we have to be accepted, right? Okay, well, how do we get accepted to medical school? What's the step before that? Well, we have to apply to medical school. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere, right? If you know a little bit more about the application process, you'll know that the application process is split into essentially 3 different seasons. Season 1 are interviews, or really the 3rd season, and just working backwards here, are interviews, which I'll just leave here. I'll leave that kind of here and then I'll explain why. And then season 2, behind the interviews or just before it, are secondaries. And then season 3, or the first part of the entire application, are the primaries, right? So let me just explain all these parts. In order to be accepted, you must have gotten an interview and done the interview. No one gets accepted just by a paper application, right? So you get your interview, you get accepted, wahoo, now you can start medical school. What do you need to do or submit to get an interview? You have to submit the secondary application. The secondary application, if you guys apply to private schools during college and use the Common App, is kind of something similar to that, where each individual school sends you individual essays, like why do you want to go to UCLA, or what diversity will you bring to our class, or what is your greatest strength or weakness. Those essays comprise the secondaries. And so you'll be submitting that. And if the school likes your secondaries, then they'll invite you for an interview. But the question begs again, let's move backwards again. If you want to get a secondary, how do you get that? Well, first you have to submit a primary application. And again, if you submitted the Common App, you'll remember what this was like. Essentially, it is the Common App where you write your personal statement. In this case, it is, why do you want to be a doctor? This is a unifying personal statement question for every pre-med applicant. And you'll also submit your grades, your MCAT score, your extracurricular activities, and your letter of recommendations, and your school list, things that we'll go over in a bit. So you'll see here that I wrote starting primary applications, secondary applications before interviews, interview acceptance, and then lastly would be start medical school. So I put these timeline things here for you just so you guys are aware of when this all happens. Medical schools typically start in August. Acceptances typically go out in the March to May area. This is why I put it in the spring. Interviews and acceptances can go through kind of that March area. So really just think like November of the previous year or October of the previous year to February or March of that following year. Interviews, so that's why I put that through the fall and winter. So you'll be getting interviews through those 2 time periods. Secondaries typically happen the summer prior, and then prior to all that are your primary applications, which you submit an entire year in 3 months before you even start medical school. A lot of people are surprised by this, so let me repeat it. If you were going to start medical school in August of 2026, you would submit this primary application in June of 2025. It's nearly a year and 3 months. So, because medical school application time periods are so long, I want you to be cognizant of what you need to get ready. So we worked everything backwards: accepted, interviews, secondaries, primaries. Now let's go even more backwards. Like, what do you need? What do you need to submit a primary application, right? And on the primary application are what I call the 6 levers. Essentially, these are the 6 things that really matter to medical school admissions. First and foremost, we have your GPA. Second, your MCAT. Oops, spelled that wrong. Third are your extracurriculars. 4 is your letters of recommendations. 5 is your school list. And then 6 is what you're submitting, or your written application. Those are the things that you need to prepare to submit a primary application. So number 6 is kind of in and of itself, so we will ignore that one for now. The school list you'll get to when you get there, so we'll ignore that one for now. Letters of recommendations, extracurriculars, and MCAT, as well as your GPA, are all things that we need to start worrying about before you apply to medical school. GPA is pretty easy, right? It's essentially what classes you take, what grades you get, that'll populate your GPA. So there's not really a lot of planning to be done there other than making sure that your prerequisite courses are in line. We will talk about the MCAT, extracurriculars, and letters of recommendations now for a 0 gap year plan, and then we'll make sure that you guys know how to adjust this for a 1 gap year or a 2 gap year plan. So let's talk about first the MCAT, right? Theoretically, you can take the MCAT at any time before you're accepted. However, it would be very, very nice to submit a primary application back in June of 2025 in this example, where your MCAT score is there, it's valid, and medical schools know what they're working with. Otherwise, it's kind of a big question mark. So let's just assume that we want our MCAT to be ready by June of 2025. So when could we take it? Well, the MCAT actually takes 1 month to come back. So we could take it in May of 2025, we could take it in April 2025, March, February, January, etc., right? Unfortunately, what are we doing in May? In May, we're in spring quarter, right? We have classes, maybe 18 units, we're working on our extracurricular activities, we're working on our research, and to add the MCAT on top of all of that can be kind of risky, especially if you really want to do well. And so I don't recommend that. That's the same reason I don't recommend in April. I don't recommend in March, February, or January when you're in winter quarter. I think this should be here, and then April or May is here. I don't recommend it on any of these places just because you have concurrent class. That class will get in the way of you doing well. So let's continue to march it backwards, right? What are we doing in December? Well, we have Christmas break. Is that enough? That's probably like 3 to 4 weeks. Typically, I recommend studying for the MCAT 8 to 10 weeks. And so 4 weeks seems a little tight, right? So we could do December, but that would jeopardize our score. We could do November, but now we're in fall quarter. We could do October maybe, or we could do September, but again, we're still in that fall quarter period. And so what is it that I recommend? I actually recommend, for these reasons where we're in class and cannot dedicate fully and wholeheartedly to the MCAT, I recommend taking it here in the summer after your second year, prior to your application date, right? So I stick it here, MCAT, and that is protected time, 8 to 10 weeks, where you can just prepare for that standardized exam. Now, you'll say, whoa, Mike, that's pretty early, right? Taking the MCAT almost essentially a year before you apply, because this spring 2024 ends in, say, around June of 2024, and then you immediately start practicing and taking your MCAT. That would be an entire year before your primaries. And to that, I say, yes, I want it early, because as I get closer and closer to the written application, I don't want to worry about having to take the MCAT on top of all my other time commitments school commitments, extracurricular commitments, research commitments. And so if we want to take the MCAT and be the most prepared for the MCAT, what must we do? Well, we should probably take the classes that will be on the MCAT. And let's just break the MCAT down quite quickly here. So the MCAT is 4 sections. Section 1 is biochem. It is chem phys. And chem phys actually stands for Gen Chem, OChem, and physics. Then we have CARS, or reading comprehension. Then we have biochem, and then psychosocial. By and large, psychology and sociology are courses that you can, is a section that you can self-study for using books and reading materials and videos. And so I actually don't recommend that you take any of the courses available in your college, just because the way that you learn psychology in college is not really related to the way that you learn psychology for the MCAT. But if you were to take courses at UCLA, they would be Psych 10 and Sociology 1. For bio and biochem, we have listed those earlier, but that's bio 1, or at UCLA, it's LS7A, bio 2, or LS7B, bio 3, or LS7C, and then biochem 153A, which is essentially biochem 1. CARS, you don't need to take any writing classes, because again, the writing in college is vastly different from the reading comprehension that you'll be tested on during the MCAT. And then for the Gen Chem, OChem physics portion, that would be Gen Chem 1 or Chem 14A, Gen Chem 2 or Chem 14B, OChem 1 or Chem 14C, and OChem 2 or Chem 14D, as well as Physics 5A, 5B, and 5C, which correlate with Physics 1, 2, and 3. So you'll see that the first section is pretty course heavy. There's a lot of different material from a lot of different subject matters. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 courses total just for this first section. And then 4 courses for that third section with a total of 11 recommended classes. Now you might be asking, Michael, what about the labs? Do I need to take Chem 14BL or Chem 14CL? To that, I say unlikely. Those courses aren't really relevant for the MCAT, and while there may be a couple of questions that are related to lab material on the MCAT, you'll be able to learn how to approach those best by just really self-studying for MCAT specific lab related questions. These are the classes I 100% recommended, these 11. These are optional, the Psych 10 Sociology 1, and then the lab classes are also optional. If you were to be efficient, like I try to be, do your best to ensure that you're taking these core classes above anything else. And then if you have extra room, throw in the math, throw in the lab, throw in the Psych 10. But if you don't have extra room, then don't optimize for any other class. You can see here on my spring schedule, when I took the MCAT at the end of my sophomore year, I made sure that all 11 of those classes were complete. And I'll show it to you here. Chem 14A, B, and C. Those are Chem 1, Gen Chem 2, OChem 1. And then you'll see I took Chem 14D here in the winter, so that's OChem 2. And you'll see I took maths, fine, because I couldn't really get into anything else. But then you'll see that in the summer, I knocked out all my physics 1, 2, and 3 by studying abroad. Nowadays, you can only knock out the first 2, but that's totally fine. You can still add physics C here. You can add physics A maybe a little bit earlier on, things of that sort. I couldn't add it earlier, and so what I did was I just added the lab course because I couldn't get into the other classes that I want, and that's totally okay. There's still a lot of flexibility. For my bio classes, you'll see I took bio, essentially this is LS7A, LS7B, which is here, and then LS7C, or essentially bio 1, bio 2, bio 3. This was an optional genetics course that is not relevant to the MCAT. And you'll see I had some extra units, so I took a lab, and then of course my biochem class that I finished. Above all else, if you want to take a 0 gap year timeline and want to optimize for MCAT timing, you need to make sure that you take those 11 classes I list here. The Gen Chem, OChem, Physics, and bio series irrelevant of the labs. Okay, so that is MCAT timing. We talked about the GPA, we talked about the MCAT. Now let's talk about extracurricular activities. A lot of folks are worried because doing all this and then the MCAT already seems like a lot. But remember, you need letters of recommendations. You need strong extracurriculars to have a chance at getting into medical school nowadays. And so where in the world can we fit our extracurricular activities? I think what would be helpful is if I show you my 3 most meaningful extracurricular activities and where they lived in my 4-year plan. So let me go ahead and bring that guy up right now. All right, so this is my first most meaningful activity where I was a health coach for a digital health platform. You can see that's my name here. This is when I applied back in 2018 because I graduated in 2019. You'll see the dates of my experiences. I started this in February of 2017 to June of 2019. And then just for context, I graduated in June of 2019. So this hadn't happened by the time I submitted. I just projected that I would finish it when I graduated college. But by the time I applied, I had started and completed this for about a year and a half. Just to add some context again, I will show you here what that would look like. So if I were applying, and again, this June of junior year or spring of junior year, that activity had started in February the previous year, which is probably around that winter area. So I'm just going to add my life here as an extracurricular just so that you can see it. And then I took a break off during the summer, but then I continued this through at least those 2 quarters. And this would continue to go throughout the rest of my college career. By the time I applied, I had about 4 quarters or a year and a half worth of experience there. Took a break for the MCAT. Now, we'll go back to the next most meaningful experience, and you'll see this is my research experience from December of 2016 to, again, I projected it all the way through. On December of 2016, where is that relative? Well, I started college in June of 2015, so it's about the end of my sophomore fall that I start getting involved with research. So about here is where I started research. So you can see how early kind of that is, right? Research. I took a break for the MCAT, research. I had about 5 quarters or about a year and 6-7 months of experience there. You notice that freshman year wrapped up, and then I had to go ahead and load up the research because I knew if I wanted to apply, it would be great if I had 5 quarters or a year and a half experience. It would be not so great if I just started and I really only had 3 months of experience. That would not look as great for me. Okay, and then lastly, I have this final most meaningful experience, Vietnamese community health, which I started in September of 2015, which is literally the beginning of my freshman year. So I'll add another column here, and I'll just add VCH here, because I had been involved with this club through the summers and through the years since the beginning. And this was one of the things that I talked about most in all of my medical school interviews and conversations. Having something that you find early and dedicate yourself to over time for a substantial amount of years, in this case, my entire college career, really is something that you want to do to build a longitudinal impact, a longitudinal involvement to demonstrate to medical schools that you're able to and willing to and do better when you commit to something over time like that. So I just want to bring to your attention just how extensive the preparation has to be in order to complete all your coursework, take the MCATs, make sure that your extracurriculars are in line. And these are just 3 extracurriculars, right? Notably, they're the most important ones, at least for my application, but there are probably 4 or 5, 6 other clubs and clinical experiences and shadowing that you have to contribute and add to your application. Maybe you throw some shadowing here, some shadowing here, and clinical experience is extremely important. And so maybe you start that pretty early here and then carry that through the years, right? And so you can see this timeline gets pretty cramped extremely quickly. And this is why most pre-meds nowadays, especially with how competitive medical school admissions has become, are taking more and more time off, just to give them time to enjoy college and give them time to create and get all the extracurricular activities that they need, and to slow down through all this coursework just so that they can protect their GPA and do a good job through it all. So I want to duplicate this plan now and then show you what it would look like if we were to take one gap year, right? And so if we were to take one gap year, what would happen? We would be able to add another set of essentially a year to our plan. And so I'm gonna go ahead and do that now for you so you can see what that would look like. We can add that here, add these gray buttons here and there and there and there. Okay. So now what would that look like is after senior year, I'd essentially call this gap year 1. And let's break this down here so that you have it, put that here, so that you have that delineation. So now we have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, gap year 1. What are the things that don't change? Well, you still graduate, right? You still graduate in June of 2016. Let me go ahead and drop one below here, add one row, that's fine. This will work. And then we'll change these to 2026, and then just adjust it based on your timeline. So this will be 2027, and then this should be summer of 2026. Okay. So now we still graduate in June of 2026, but we start medical school a year later, this time in August of 2027. And so you'll notice that if I start medical school in August of 2027, all this stuff can move down, right? And my interviews and my acceptances will move down a tad, and then all of this will come down appropriately. And so instead of applying and submitting my personal statement, extracurricular activities, my letters of recommendations in June of 2025, I'm gonna go ahead and actually do that in June of 2026, essentially the same time that I graduate college, right? This becomes a little bit busy, right? We're working on our last quarter at UCLA. However, we're also working on our personal statement, our extracurricular activities, submitting our primary application, but it's doable. After we graduate, we get a full year to write our application, our secondaries, our interviews, and then eventually get accepted. So this makes that part a little bit more manageable, because remember, if you looked at the 0 gap year timeline, I had to write my secondaries. For example, why do I want to go to UCLA? Why do I want to go to USC? Why do I want to go to Mount Sinai Medical School? Or what will I bring to NYU? Write that during the summer between junior and senior year. And I have to fly across the country, in this case, maybe Zoom nowadays, and do interviews while I have classes, right? In this case, let's see what classes I had my senior year, but I remember having to try to choose, and you can see I did this very intentionally. If you look at the classes that I took, Com 1, 194H, which was a 2-unit honor seminar, MCDB 60, I chose those on purpose because they were the most flexible courses that I could watch online, that I could submit online assignments, so that I could fly across the country during the week to do my medical school interviews. And so all of this has to be done intentionally, or else you'll get to the point where you're gonna get a senior class because you're missing half the time, and it just doesn't allow you to be out of the country, right? While you're, out of the state or off campus while you're interviewing for medical schools. But in that one gap year plan, that doesn't become an issue because you've already graduated. So maybe your secondaries are a little bit less stressed. Maybe and your interviews are more open for you to complete. With that being said, I want to make it clear to you that I would probably push the MCAT down another year. Again, still optimized for the summer, just because this is a protected time where you can dedicate 8 to 10 weeks. You could do it here, but then again, you run the risk of having like 2 years, and if you don't apply here and your application is not ready here, you might have to take 2 gap years, and then we start running the risk of our MCAT like expiring and then having to retake it, which would be no fun for anyone, especially if you got a good score. The thing that I want to bring your attention to, right, is a lot of people will assume I'm going to take one gap year, and if I do, I'll get a full year to work on my extracurricular activities, my letters of recommendations, and that will be enough time, full time essentially, so that I can bolster up my application. But I want to be clear what year you get, right? If you take 0 gap years in plan 1 here, then you have to have everything ready. I actually forgot to mention the letters of recommendations, but let's say I'll show you kind of my letters of recommendations now so that you can see where I got them from. So if you scroll all the way down, you'll see that I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 letters of recommendations. This one was a copy of this one. So 5 total letters of recommendations, and I'll show you where I got each of these. So this one was my Department of Neurology and Neurobiology. This was my research, so this became a letter of recommendation. And notice that I had been, again, involved with it for about a year and 9 months before I applied, almost 2 years. Asian languages and culture came from my Buddhism class. Let's see, when I took my Buddhism class, that was Asian 60W, so junior year fall, so pretty tight, right? So I'll take a Buddhism, I'll add that there, and then I put letter of recommendation there. My next one was UCLA and Cedars-Sinai. So this was a course that I took all through freshman year. So I'll just add that here. This is GE80A, GE80B, GE80C. So I took that class for the whole year, and I got a letter of recommendation from that. Boom. And then next is University of Glasgow, or my physics course. Remember, I took studied abroad, physics A, B, and C here. And this gave me a letter of recommendation here. And then lastly, I got a letter of recommendation from a Cedars-Sinai doctor that I shadowed. And that doctor was someone that I worked with through the second year summer. So I did that while I was taking the MCAT. And so we'll go Cedars-Sinai professor, and that letter of recommendation was here. So you can see I got 2 letters my first year, which again, I only knew were important because I saw that I had such a tight timeline. I got 1 letter for my research that I was involved with 2 years early before I applied to medical school. I got one during the summer of my MCAT studying, and then I was a little bit tight on time, but I needed to get a non-science letter of recommendation, and I got that from my Buddhism class my junior year fall, right? Very tight timeline. If you suddenly forget that you need a letter of recommendation, or you don't kind of get on top of some of those things, you can see how they can back up, and you'll get to a point where you'll need things desperately. And typically when you're desperate for a letter of recommendation, those don't tend to go very well. Okay, so that is our no gap year plan. For our 1 gap year plan, I just again want to paint the picture of what year you actually get, right? You don't get a blank year after you graduated to build your application. Remember, your application is pretty much set in stone here, right? Not here when you're accepted, but it's pretty much set in stone here. Yes, you can project things. However, just make sure that you recognize what that means. So I'll show you an example here where we have a medical student or a pre-med who applied to medical school on a 1 gap year timeline, but projected again the hours that they would have. So they got accepted to a job as a medical scribe or a medical assistant at this ENT office. However, how many hours did they complete by the time that they submitted their primary? 0. And how many hours did they anticipate completing over the next year? Okay, 2,300. So I wrote here, your gap year can be a part of your plan. Still, there are cons to doing so because you haven't actually started. And you can see a lot of the writing here is a little bit awkward when you look at it. It says, for the gap year, I will be working as a medical scribe and eventually be certified as a medical assistant. While I have shadowed doctors before, I'm excited to have a more active role by aiding physicians and nurses and providing the best care as possible to their patients. Having this experience will make me more prepared to be a physician through experiencing the daily routine. I'm especially looking forward to learning about patients' conditions and their lives in general, improving my listening skills. you can see it's not really an impactful experience, and how could it be? This pre-med had done 0 hours of it, so it doesn't make sense for them to really understand what the role is, especially if they're going to put in 2,300 hours. Their understanding of the role today is pretty limited to their detriment, right? So if you're hoping for a one gap year to save your medical school application, I caution you to recognize that gap year is less time than you actually think. Look at the time that you get. You get your junior year spring, you get your junior year summer, but really you're taking the MCAT that summer, so maybe you get your sophomore year summer, I should say. Then you get fall and winter and part of your senior year spring. But again, that's not full time. You still have 18 units here, 18 units there, 16 units there trying to graduate. And so the extra time that you get that year to work on your application is not a full-time 40-hour work week. You're not going to be able to just commit to a full-time scribe position that senior year. You can commit to it after, but again, you saw what that looks like on that pre-med application where 0 hours had been dedicated to it, and so you can see just how ineffective some of those experiences may be. You'll get through your scribing, and then maybe you'll talk about it in your secondaries, and maybe you'll talk about your interviews, but again, your primaries are done by this point here, your spring of senior year. So be cognizant of that. Don't rely on your one gap year to suddenly save the day because you have a full year off. No. Recognize that really you only have a couple of quarters, and quarters in college tend to be much, much busier pre-graduation just because you have 20, 30, 40, 50 hours of schoolwork to complete. With that being said, you can start working on your extracurriculars a little bit later, right? If you have one gap year, you can space these out, and then you can also space your coursework out, right? So you can take you can move OChem 1, you can move OChem 2 down, and then that'll give you some time. You can move OChem 1 down. You can move Gen Chem 1, you can move some physics down to the next year, just so that you have some time to really get good grades on all of these coursework. And now you're only having to do 1 or 2 science classes per quarter instead of 2 science classes for every quarter for 2 years, with some quarters being 3, including a math or a GE, and clinical experience and research and your most meaningful extracurricular activities. You can get started with research a little bit later. You can put that here. Your MCAT happens a little bit later. All this to say that if you take one gap year, then you can space out the remainder of your application. Your GPA will be protected because you'll take fewer courses over time. Your MCAT will be still protected the same way. It really doesn't really change. Your extracurricular activities will be more time, 3 or 4 more quarters to really take advantage or even grow the extracurriculars you're involved with. Imagine having an extracurricular like VCH for, 9 to 12 quarters before you apply. The impact in that organization will be pretty high. Same with research. Imagine having 3 years of research before you apply, as opposed to 1 and 9 months like I did. So there are pros to the one gap year timeline, but my philosophy has always been aim for what your goal is, and then if you need more time, bump your timeline back. I find it's kind of disheartening when you know you want to apply to medical school, you kind of coast along without any real plan or timeline, and then when it comes time to apply in junior year on a no gap year timeline, you have to tell yourself, hey, I'm not ready, and I'm kind of disappointed that I'm not ready because I didn't prepare for it. It's different to prepare and then life kind of gets in the way, as opposed to not prepare and be forced to take a gap year, and I don't want you guys to be in that situation. Okay, so now we'll do this one more time for a 2 gap year timeline, just to again show you just how much time you get in this scenario. This is my personal favorite setup for folks that are interested in going to medical school and want a little bit more time off as well. So we'll go ahead and add this sequence here for you.
So I'm just adding that second gap year here. I'm adding this bracket, gap year 2, and then you can just change these numbers accordingly. Boom. And then now again, what doesn't change, you still graduate in senior year of college, but everything else moves down, right? The primaries move down a year, starting medical school moves down a year. So you move to August of 2028, your primaries go to June of 2027. I personally love this plan, and this is actually the plan I was considering on doing before I decided to take 0 gap years. The reason I love this plan is that after you graduate, you genuinely have a full year, right? Summer of 2026, fall of 2026, winter of 2026, and spring of 2027. Essentially, June 2026 to June 2027, a full year to work as a medical assistant, work on a Fulbright scholarship, work at, what I wanted to do was work at this orthopedic clinic in Burbank that helped you get an understanding of both the clinical and business sides of medicine. And so I felt like that was really, really strong experience not to turn up and turn down. And I wanted it before the start of my medical school experience, but eventually it didn't work out. They couldn't hold my spot. And so I ended up taking no gap years. But if you really want to space out your journey, this is a very common path that many pre-meds are doing nowadays. And you can see how highly effective it is, right? An entire year for you to add extracurricular activities, do a full year of full-time research. Your 40-hour a week at a research position will be more than any 3 or 4 or 5 year part-time during college 10-hour a week experience that most undergrads do. The same will go for your extracurricular activities. The same will go for your letters of recommendations. When you spend that much time with a person or a lab or an activity, you will rack up hours quickly. You'll rack up impact quickly. And this year makes a lot of pre-meds very, 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 very competitive. So this is the difference between the 1 gap year and 2 gap year plans. You actually get a true year off. And again, the same applies. You can space out your college experiences now that these are probably done because you graduated, but you can space out your coursework so you don't have to be stressed. You can take the MCAT after you graduate so that you don't have to balance that. And then all of these other places kind of fall in line and you have a ton of white space to work with and execute on. Okay. So those are the 0, 1, and 2 gap year plans. We talked about how we want to plan for the MCAT based on what plan you want, a 0 gap year, a 2 gap year, a 1 gap year, or a 2 gap year plan. We talked about what classes go on the MCAT. Those are here. These are my 11 recommended courses. We talked about how to plan for your extracurricular activities and make sure that they find their way into your 4-year plan. Because if you don't account for them, you will start them late. I promise you, you will start your research 1 quarter before you apply and say, oh, I have no publications, I have no impact, I have no leadership responsibilities in my research. And it's because you have not let time work, right? Time is working against you instead of for you. I can show you how the 3 most meaningful activities will remove mine because I took 0 gap years and show you an application that got into a top 5 medical school on a full ride and where and how he planned his extracurricular activities. So let's go ahead and look here at this application. Okay, so this is Steve's application, and in this one you'll see that his most meaningful activity, the first one was an emergency department scribe from May of 2017 to May of 2018. So if you take a look at this 1 gap year timeline, Steve actually ended up graduating, let's say, June of 2018. And so his primaries were submitted on June of 2018, and then he started medical school on August of 2019, actually, with me. And so if you take a look here at this, May 2017 to May 2018, so he actually had his scribe position through kind of a year, essentially. So scribe, 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 scribe. So about a year's worth of scribing, and he was able to start that pretty on the later side, right? Junior year is when he got most of his clinical experiences, as opposed to what I had to do, which is start like freshman year to really get ahead of it. His next most meaningful activity here was being a teaching assistant for the prison education program. He started that in January of 2016 and went through June of 2019. So prison education program, he essentially went through all the way until he started medical school, at least one summer prior. So prison education program, and he was doing that since January of 2016, which would be the winter of 2 years prior, right? So that was that, and then he started it kind of here, right? So you can see almost 3 years worth of experience in this program that he was able to complete, and he's able to do that and rack up those hours and rack up that experience and leadership because he's taking that one gap year. It gives him that extra time, if you do start something early, right, like in sophomore and freshman year, to really grow that experience over time. 2016, and then the last most meaningful activity was actually a research activity he started even before that in 2015 and stopped in June of 2018 when he finished college. And so we can actually start that up right here. He started his research when he started college in 2015. Actually, this is probably prior to starting college. No. Yeah, this is his sophomore year again, but in winter quarter. So instead of January 2016, he started this about 8 months earlier than that. So really kind of in the summer or spring of his freshman year. So I'll stick that here. So again, you can start to see as he's developing these things over time, the benefit of having a one gap year plan is that you really get to let this grow, right? This really starts to develop and becomes one of your it factors and standout factors just on the sheer basis of how long you've been involved. Nothing on my application was longer than 4 years because it couldn't be. I could only max out at 3 years, and so that is what I needed to do. But if you take one gap year, you can start doing things for 4 years. You take 2 gap years, you can start doing things for 5 years, and that becomes a very, very impressive activity. Okay, so this is our example of a 2 gap year student and where her most meaningful activities lied. So we have a student here who submitted an application to join the August of 2023 class, but ended up graduating in June of 2021. So we'll start here with this peer mental health coach position that she was involved with. She was actually involved with that over 4 years, since freshman year all the way through her graduation. So you can see how that develops over time and ends up being one of her most meaningful activities. And this is only, again, possible if you apply later to medical school. She could actually have even taken on an administrative or leadership role even past graduating. And so you can see that extracurricular really develops over time. Something, again, that I didn't have the luxury of when I only had 4 quarters to work on my life before I had to apply to medical school. Another one of her most meaningful activities was her research. This is her breast cancer research that she was involved with for 3 entire years. And so she started in 2018 and went all the way through her graduation in 2021. Again, 3 entire years of research. You can imagine just how much more someone accomplishes, just how much more responsibility they have compared to what I have here, which is about a year and a half prior to my application to medical school. And then lastly, her third most meaningful activity was this clinical assistant position at a plastic and reconstructive surgery office. She completed 2,000 whole hours or a full year working full-time, and then an additional anticipated second year working at the clinic. And so you can see how that scribe full-time medical assistant position really racks up those hours. She was at a total of 4,500 clinical hours prior to starting medical school. So she has a ton of experience that she can write in her primaries, her secondaries, talk about during her interviews. And you can imagine just how strong that letter of recommendation is just by way of the time that she spent with that surgeon. So this just goes to show you that more time just means you can spread everything out a little bit better. But even if you decide to take more time, the key word is decide. I want you to actively choose and intentionally choose the timeline and the journey that makes the most sense for you. Getting into medical school and becoming a doctor is not a race. You will have 30 years of being in this profession. 32 versus 31 versus 30 years is no different, especially if you have to push to the metal and burn yourself out in college and do things that are just unhealthy for your physical and mental health. I'm not saying that everyone who takes 0 gap years is unhealthy, and I'm not saying people who take 2 gap years are just all of a sudden more healthy. However, I think when you start to realize just how different these plans are, you can choose the one that is right for you and your interests. I personally felt like I had a handle on it, and so I started the things that I wanted to start pretty early, and I was able to build an application to my unique liking and my unique strengths by the time junior year spring rolled around. For most people who are exploring, and for most pre-meds nowadays, this is a very uncommon scenario. And so if you need to take 1 year or want to take 2 years, there is no shame in that. In fact, that is more common than not. My last point here is if you apply when you're not ready, that is not a good sign because your application will be weaker. You will need, worst case scenario, to join the 60% of pre-meds who don't get into medical school when they apply every single year. That's 30,000 pre-meds who apply prematurely or apply with an application that really could benefit from substantial strengthening. And if that means you got to take a year, I would rather you take a year to complete and optimize your application before just jumping right into it and not having a prepared application that gives you the best chances to get into medical school your very first try. Every application after that becomes a little harder and harder and harder because as you're reapplying, you're starting to lose faith in yourself, you start to lose that confidence, and you have to answer the question, well, no one accepted you last year, what changed this year? And if the change isn't over the top drastic wow, then a lot of medical schools have trouble figuring out why it is they should give you a chance this year as opposed to the other years. Okay, so this was a complete in-depth breakdown on 4-year plans using this 4-year plan template. Hopefully it was helpful for you to see a 0, a 1, and a 2 gap year plan all broken down. In the link in the description box below, I will have pre-filled out 4-year plans, including the one that I used, and all of it's in renditions, so you can be inspired by just how I'm kind of moseying along to my eventual perfect schedule. There's no fancy filters, it doesn't look great, there's not a lot of hyperlinks, but it works, and it got me to be the place where I am today, having taken 0 gap years, a fully prepared medical school application that was competitive for my dream medical school at that time was UCLA. And so I want you to have the same, whether it's a 0, a 1, or a 2 gap year plan. I am going to combine, especially for UCLA students, what I would recommend for the most common majors like MIMG, MCDB, neuroscience, and the UCLA pre-health requirements so that you can use this completely plug and play. You don't have to wait or you don't have to do hours and hours of research. You can customize this to your own journey right away. You'll throw on there when you're going to take the MCAT, when you're going to start your primary applications, and then you'll have a very clear blueprint. You can just walk along until you submit your application and get accepted to medical school. Hopefully this was helpful, and if you have any other questions, I'm always available to support in the comments. Leave me a comment down below or contact us and our team through the information in the description box below. Thank you very much.
Hopefully this video got you one step closer to building your 4-year plan. This plug and play template will always be free, and it's available for you now in the link in my description below. And if you want even more detail on how to make your application as competitive as possible, check out this 2-hour workshop where I break down every single component that goes into medical school applications. I call them the 6 levers. I break down every part that matters within them and show you how to maximize everything from your GPA, your MCAT, your extracurricular activities, your letters of recommendations, your school list, and your written application plus interviews. If you have a dialed in 4-year plan and understand the 6 levers, you are well on your way to becoming a doctor. If that video sounds helpful, I'll see you again over there, and thank you for watching this video.